Welcome to LexMedia's Coffee with the Candidates. I'm Colleen Smith, and I'm joined today by Jim Shaw. Jim, thank you for joining me today at the Coffee with the Candidates.
I'm happy to be here with you today, Colleen, the second time we're doing this. And I remember talking with folks afterwards. People were quite pleased. Felt that it was a way to really become informed before the election. So glad we can do this. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, today we are going to be joined by the candidates that are running for selectmen and school committee. This is an important year as we are looking for a new superintendent. We're addressing overcrowding issues in the schools, tax rates, and so much more. We have an important election happening on November 4th. We hope you enjoy meeting the candidates in this forum and that you will get out and vote. Our first guest today is Bill Hurley. Bill, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, Colleen. Thank
Welcome,
you.
Bill.
Jim.
Nice to see you.
My pleasure.
So, Bill, you're running for school committee.
That I am.
And we're very excited to have you join us. And why don't you talk a little bit about your experience?
Well, I can talk about my experience here in Lexington, and I can talk about my experiences as an educator. And so let's focus on education and as it relates to this seat for the school committee. Moved here in 1975, so I've been in Lexington for 39 years. And during that, since 1970, I've been involved in public education. I've been a teacher, I've been a psychologist, I've been a special education director, I've been a principal. I've spent 5 years as an assistant superintendent of schools on the North Shore. And then the last 14 years of my career, I was a superintendent, first in Marshfield, then 8 years in Sudbury. And then after retiring and doing some consulting for a year, I did the interim superintendency here in 2004, 2005. So that's a thumbnail sketch of what I've done as an educator. I've also been very involved in the community all those years. I mean, I coached and was on the board of Little League and was on the board of the hockey, youth hockey, Bedford and Lexington. Have stayed very involved. I've been on the capital expenditure committee for 9 years since I finished, since I retired as a superintendent. And just have stayed very close to the people in town and connected to the town, and very interested in the youth and their growth and development to this day.
Still capital expenditures has a lot to do with in terms of spending on school buildings.
Correct.
Yeah. So the schools have been sort of part of your domain, if you will, for some time as a member of the capital expenditures committee.
Yeah, I've served actually as the liaison. There are 5 members on our committee, and we meet every year with all the departments in town: recreation, police, fire, all the departments. And each of us serve as liaison to at least 1 or 2 of the different departments. And I've been the liaison to the facilities department and to the school committee since I've been on the capital expenditure committee.
So you've been involved with sort of the funding for some of the new schools that have been built here, and the planning for future schools or future answers to sort of expanding student population. Yeah,
I've been involved in actually in 2 ways, both as a member of the capital expenditure committee, where we basically, our role is to recommend to town meeting all the capital projects that come before the town. I've also served as the liaison to our capital expenditure committee to the schools, and I've been appointed by the school committee independently of that to be on different committees that have looked at the need for schools. Back in the 80s, I was on a committee, the school committee appointed me to look at whether or not we should close an additional school. So my involvement with the schools in Lexington spans really a period over 25 years.
Well, that kind of begs the question then, you know, so many years later in your retirement, due to the vacancy left by Mary Ann Stewart, who was appointed by the governor to be on the Board of Education, you've decided you want to run and serve on the school committee. Tell us why.
There are 2 critical reasons this year that really brought this to my attention. And one is the fact that we've had a superintendent here for 9 years, beginning his 10th year. So the school system has had that stability, and that stability is very important. We're now in the process of, the school committee is in the process of doing a search for a new superintendent. That's a critical role. It is the most important thing on the agenda for the school committee this year, because whoever that is, whatever man or woman comes in to fill that role, that person is going to be the leader, the educational leader of the school system. And Lexington has done very, very well. It has a very good reputation within the state, even outside of the state. And we want that to continue. I personally would want that to continue. My son and daughter benefited from an outstanding education here, and I'd like to see the children still in our schools have that same benefit. And that means leadership at the top, that's first class. And to be a member of the committee that's going to elect that person is very, very important to me. And I think the skill sets that I bring in my life experience as an educator would be very helpful in that process.
So, and you talked about at the beginning of the interview about your vast experience in education as the interim superintendent here in Lexington. Yeah. What skill sets will you be looking for, if elected, in the new superintendent?
Oh, if you give me about 25 minutes, I could tell you all the things that a superintendent needs to do. It's a tough job, as so many positions in education are, and just as they are in other fields as well. But particularly because it's such a public figure, the person really is somebody that looks to for, number one, I think, integrity. This is a person that we can entrust our children to, that we can entrust that this person will lead the educators within the system in the right path to provide for our youngsters the kind of education that they need, and the quality of education that they need. So that person really is along with the school committee, is the voice and the persona, if you will, of the schools and what the schools' needs are. And I always look at the schools, no matter where I've been superintendent or as a principal, in terms of the whole community. It's not that the schools are an isolation to themselves and that we want to grab every single penny that we can out of the town's operating budget, but we do want to have a high quality education while maintaining a high quality of life for everybody who lives here. So for those reasons in particular, I think that the skills that I bring just as over the 35 years help me know as we're looking for candidates what to look for in a person. And that item I mentioned of personal integrity, clearly they're going to have the credentials. I mean, no one's going to make it to the finals who doesn't have the credentials. That's not the issue. That's not the question. But who is this person? Is this somebody that we can trust, who's going to be open, is going to be honest, will listen to different opinions? I'm someone who, I'm very comfortable with different opinions. I don't want people working with me or for me who think exactly the way that I do. I'm going to be on a committee, and there'll be times when we on the committee have different perspectives, and I'll look for different perspectives to help me see something perhaps that I might not be thinking about. So there are a lot of qualities we're looking for. Certainly the person has to be an outstanding educator and somebody really dedicated to young people and to their growth and to the professional development of the teachers and the staff that work in the school system. So those are just some of the qualities that I look for. And the experience, I find that anyone who's been a principal has an advantage in the superintendency because you know school systems are about the schools that are in them and how they're run. It's not a requirement. And I've known some people who have not been principals who have been very, very successful. But I think it's very, very helpful.
We were talking a little earlier before you came about the school building master plan.
Yes.
And it really hasn't been revised since the late 1980s. And is there some discussion about that, or is there any effort, or do you have any thoughts about revitalizing or revising this?
My understanding is that is under process right now. I know that the committee is working with a consulting firm looking at the current utilization of space right now. And that is very, very important, particularly as we're hearing that even now the enrollment is increasing to the point that at some of the schools people have concerns about class sizes and just the space that's available to them. So that, you know, the master plan, I think, should always be something that's being reviewed and under review, because we go through these ebbs and tides. And you know, a number of years ago, we had 9,000 students in this community. I mean, I can remember when we were closing schools, one at a time, 1 year after another, and then it peaks up again, and the enrollment begins to increase. So it can't be a static document. It has to be something that's under constant review. And the conversation of people who are following this topic are very well aware of the fact that predicting what the student population is going to look like 5 to 10 years from now is extremely difficult. And there aren't many people who would want to say, we can tell you what it is. We might can tell you for a year or two, but beyond that, it's somewhat speculative. So it's something that is under review and should always be under review.
Well, I think in doing some research for the interview, you had this experience, I believe, in Sudbury, where you had an increase of 800 plus students. And as we're looking at Lexington and the increase in enrollment and the overcrowding in schools, and traditional forecasting just is not working at this point in time, what would you suggest or recommend for a shorter, long-term strategy to help address this issue in the schools?
It depends on the crunch. You know, where are we in the crunch right now? Some short-term strategies, if, you know, let's say for the first year or two. I mean, there are options. And what I would do if I'm a member of the committee is join the rest of my committee members in looking at what those options are. The way I operate, whether it's as a superintendent or a school committee member or anything I do in life, is to set priorities. And then you begin making your decisions based on those priorities. So what are some of the options? Some of the options are you increase class sizes if you don't have enough space. Actually, I'd step back first and wait for this report on how is space currently being utilized. Can we do it more efficiently and more effectively? Can we steal from this place and give it to classrooms?
So you're not exactly advocating larger classes. You're just saying we
not
have
at
to
all.
look at everything. I just wanted to make sure we
Yep.
were clear on that. Yeah.
No, that I mean, these are options. Some of them are very, very unpleasant. To me, that's where I begin. Class sizes at first with me.
Yeah.
When you can't meet that criteria, then what you do is maybe you put art on the cart, or that's an expression people use. You take one of the special subjects areas that might be in a classroom, dedicate it to a classroom, and then that teacher has to move around. Now, that's not ideal either, because programmatically the program isn't going to be as strong or as effective as you'd want it to be. Some other short-term options are you put modulars on, particularly short, not the prefab kind that are much more permanent that we have at the high school, but the ones that are good for have a lifespan for up to 5 years. It's an option, not necessarily a good option. Another short-term option is an addition to a building. If you can do that, you know, within 24 months or less, or maybe more than one. When you get into long-term options, you're looking at really either an additional school or additions to one or more of the existing facilities. So these are all the options, and I'm not dedicating myself to any one of them. You'd have to look at every single one of them, setting the priorities. For you asked me straightforward, Jim, what would be, you didn't ask me that, but what would be my priority? Right. My priority always is class sizes. What goes on between the teacher and the students is what teaching is all about.
That's where it's happening.
That's where it's happening. That's what it's all about. And we try to do everything, we fit everything else in around that parameter, from my perspective.
And along the same lines of talking about the teacher and the students, Lexington does have such a wonderful reputation for the school system. What, in addition to the academics, what would you recommend to help support the students and a social and emotional standpoint, in addition to the academics?
You're touching something near and dear to my heart. As my background is a psychologist. And the year that I was interim here, interestingly, I met with the new principal had just been hired, Michael Smith. Michael is remember his first name. I think it was Michael Smith. And the two of us sat down and talked about what we had heard about the pressure that students were undergoing. Mike Jones, thank you, Mike Jones, and that was 10 years ago. And we talked about what can we do to reduce that stress, particularly at the high school. That's where the issue happened to be. And so that the staff that year studied the whole issue of grade point averaging, weighted grade point averaging, and came with a proposal to me at the end of the year. And I said, to do away with weighted grade point average, just one more thing that will layer on the youngsters. We're like, we've got to take this course to get the weighted grade point average up. And I said to him, it's too late in the game for us to do it this year. Let's put it on the table for discussion, which we did. I said, the town's going to need to have input to this. They won't act on it this year. And I recommended to the committee that they form a wider committee than just the staff to let them enter the debate. And a year later, they studied it, and a year later, they did implement it. That's just an example of what you do. I think the other thing...
But just to illustrate the point, or just drive it home a little further, it wasn't that you were opposed or for it, it's just you wanted the process to be open. You wanted to go through an appropriate review.
Absolutely, because it's just, and I did have a stance. My own personal stance was that that we do so well and that we produce such outstanding students, and the colleges know that.
Right.
I mean, they know. They have a database showing Lexington students do well. But even students who need support, our students who have the support, get the kind of support that they need, whether it's special education support or remedial support in other areas. But the fact of the matter is that we don't want youngsters to be under so much pressure that they won't perform at their best if the adrenaline is running so high.
Stress. We're talking about ways to relieve stress, and here,
and
for some folks, it's just adding another level of stress.
Yeah.
So I do understand that.
So it's being conscious of that and engaging people in conversation. And that includes parents as well as the students themselves, as well as our staff members. Because one thing I always say to people, we have to remember the students belong to the parents. They're not ours. As much sometimes we like to get involved and say to people, you're putting too much stress on your son or your daughter. We have to respect their concerns, but help people realize that balance, the important balance of the fullness of their life. It's not just the academics, it's the whole experience that they get while they're in our school
Before
system.
we close this out, I know I had a quick question for you. It's sort of in the realm of what you've just been talking about. Ever since my son was at the high school, and even before and even after, and he graduated in the late 2000s, there's always talk about how the AP kids or the high-performing kids, a lot of attention focus on them, a lot of kids, attention focus on kids with that plans, a lot of kids in the middle just sort of fall through the cracks. What do you say about that? Is that for real? Is it if it is it being addressed? I don't know. I mean,
Yeah,
it's one of those things you hear on the street, so I thought I'd throw it out.
It's something that I've heard from people in this community since I moved here in 1975. I've heard some people say, the high school wasn't the right place, for my son or my daughter. And what I ask of teachers, and I asked Michael and the staff at the high school that year was, pay close attention to all the students in your classroom. And the way to connect with young people is to find out what interests them. So go out of your way to beyond just the teaching of your content area, but really get to know them as people. Have conversations with them. It's when we know what interests young people that we spark, we get that spark, and we draw them in. So a lot of the youngsters that are described as being the ones in the middle, that they're not causing any trouble for anybody, they don't need any additional support. And some parents say, we feel like they're being squeezed out. Well, one way to avoid that, if that is the case, is to make personal connections with staff to student.
Guys like Van Seashults, I remember when he was principal.
Phenomenal.
He went to everything. He went to, if it even meant traveling to New York to support the singers or whatever,
Yep.
he was there. I just love that, man.
Yeah. And it's not to say the staff doesn't do it,
Right.
but I mean, they've got a tough job. If you're at the high school, you'd have 100 more students. If you're at the elementary or middle school, you've got 25 or however many students. And focusing in on every one of them is a hard thing to do. But if we consciously make that effort, and they know that you've tried to make a connection with me, they'll respond.
One other question, kind of an obligatory question, we're going to ask all the candidates that are running in the special election is, if elected, will you seek re-election? In your case, it would be in March of next year.
After all I'm going through right now, I would be silly not to.
Okay.
Yeah, unequivocally, yes. I'm elected, I'm running
Because,
again.
you hear on the streets, are they running, are they not running? And let's just put that room to
Thank
rest
you,
right
yes.
now.
Yeah.
Well, Bill, thank you so much for engaging in conversation with us today. I enjoyed meeting you, and I wish you the best of luck on November 4th.
And I wish you a happy birthday today,
Thank
Colleen.
you.
Happy birthday, Colleen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both.